The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Ambassador Vareth of the Zephron Empire stood before the assembled delegates. His crystalline form shimmered under the soft luminescence of the vast dome, reflecting countless colors across the polished floor. For 3 standard cycles he had been preparing this presentation, compiling data that would challenge everything the civilized galaxy believed about the mysterious species called humans. The council consisted of representatives from 47 star nations, each more ancient than the last. The Zephrons themselves had been traveling between stars for over 12,000 years. The insectoid Kresh had built their first interstellar vessel when Earth's dominant species were still small mammals hiding from reptilian predators. Even the youngest members of the council, the aquatic Malor, had been exploring nearby systems for 3 millennia before humanity discovered fire. Yet here they were, gathered in emergency session, trying to understand a species that had appeared on the galactic stage only 200 years ago, like a supernova in the darkness of space. Vareth activated the holographic display. Images of human vessels materialized above the assembly, their designs brutal and efficient in ways that made several delegates recoil. Unlike the elegant curves of Zephron ships or the organic beauty of Kresh biovessels, human spacecraft looked like weapons that happened to have engines attached. Sharp angles, reinforced hulls, and weapon systems integrated into every surface. They were not ships designed for exploration or trade. They were predators given the ability to hunt among the stars. Honored delegates, Vareth began, his voice resonating through the translation matrices. We convened this session because of an alarming discovery. In the 2 centuries since humanity joined our community, we have observed something unprecedented, something that defies our understanding of species development and social evolution. A Kresh delegate clicked her mandibles impatiently. Ambassador Vareth, we are aware of human aggression. Their military capabilities are well documented. Their territorial disputes, their wars among themselves before unification, their competitive nature. This is not news to the council. Vareth's form flickered, a sign of agitation among his people. With respect, Council Member Thrix, you misunderstand. I'm not here to discuss human aggression. I am here to discuss something far more disturbing. I am here to discuss why, despite humanity's expansion across 400 systems, despite their population numbering in the trillions, we have never encountered a single descendant of those who survived the Earth assault. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. Several delegates leaned forward, their attention now completely focused on the Zephron ambassador. The Earth assault. Even speaking those words sent ripples of discomfort through the assembly. It had happened 60 standard years ago, an event that still haunted the collective conscience of the galaxy. The Kraler swarm, a hive-minded species from beyond the rim, had descended upon Earth with the singular purpose of harvesting its biomass. 3 billion organic drones, supported by 70,000 capital ships, had surrounded humanity's homeworld. The attack had been perfectly coordinated, as all Kraler operations were. They struck without warning, without negotiation, without mercy. The swarm did not seek conquest or subjugation. They sought consumption. Every living thing on Earth would be processed into genetic material to birth more drones, more ships, more swarm. Humanity had fought back with everything they had. Their defense fleet, primitive by galactic standards but fierce beyond measure, had thrown itself against the swarm. For 3 days and 3 nights, Earth's sky had burned with the light of dying ships. Human vessels rammed Kraler cruisers when their weapons ran dry. Pilots ejected their life pods toward enemy vessels, detonating their ships' reactors at point-blank range. Soldiers on the ground fought with weapons, then with tools, then with rocks and bare hands as the drones descended. The Galactic Council had watched it all unfold, bound by the prime directive of non-interference. Ancient laws written when the Council was young forbade intervention in the conflicts of species who had not yet proven themselves worthy of full membership. Humanity had been granted associate status only 30 years prior. They had access to trade routes and communication networks, but not military protection. Not yet, the laws were clear. The laws were absolute, or so the Council had told themselves as they watched Earth burn. By the end of the 3rd day, the Kraler swarm had been driven back. Not defeated, not destroyed, but forced to retreat by a species that should have been consumed within hours. The cost had been catastrophic. 2 billion humans dead, entire continents reduced to ash, Oceans boiled away. The atmosphere itself had been set aflame in places, creating firestorms that raged for weeks. But Earth still stood. Humanity still breathed. And the Krayler swarm, for the first time in their million-year history, had failed to harvest a world. The Galactic Council had sent aid afterward, of course. Medical supplies, reconstruction materials, terraforming technology to restore the damaged planet. It had been the least they could do, though many delegates privately acknowledged it could never be enough. The guilt of inaction hung over the Council like a dark cloud. Humanity had accepted the aid with cold politeness. They had not accused the Council of cowardice. They had not demanded apologies or reparations. They had simply rebuilt their world, tended to their survivors, and continued their expansion into the stars as if nothing had happened. But now, 60 years later, Ambassador Vereth stood before the Council with data that suggested something was very, very wrong. I have spent the past 3 cycles investigating human population distribution, Vereth continued, manipulating the holographic display. A map of human-controlled space appeared, dotted with thousands of settlements across hundreds of worlds. Humanity's expansion has been remarkable. They have established colonies, trading posts, military installations, and research facilities throughout their territory. Their population grows at a rate consistent with a healthy, thriving civilization. Birth rates are normal. Death rates from natural causes follow expected patterns. By every measurable standard, humanity is flourishing. He paused, letting the data sink in before delivering the next revelation. However, when I cross-referenced population records with genetic markers, I discovered an impossibility. Of the 4 trillion humans currently alive, not one carries the genetic signature of those who survived the Earth assault. Not one descends from the 2 billion survivors. The entire human population alive today descends from the 8 billion who were off-world during the attack. The colonists, the merchants, the explorers, the military personnel stationed in other systems. But the survivors of Earth itself? They left no children, no grandchildren, no legacy. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the autonomous translation system seemed to pause, as if the machines themselves needed a moment to process what had been said. That is impossible. Council member Thrix finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. A population of 2 billion spread across an entire planet, all choosing not to reproduce. The statistical probability approaches 0. Not 0, Vereth corrected quietly. Merely impossible by any natural means. A Melor delegate raised a tentacle. Perhaps a plague? A disease that affected only those exposed to Krayler biological weapons? Something that rendered them sterile? Vereth's form dimmed. I considered that possibility. I accessed medical records from the post-assault period. The survivors were extensively examined. No plague, no disease. No biological damage to reproductive systems. The survivors were physically capable of having children. They simply chose not to. All 2 billion of them. Without exception, another delegate spoke up, his voice trembling slightly. Cultural trauma? A collective decision not to bring children into a world that had nearly been destroyed? For 60 years? Vereth asked. Across an entire population? With not a single individual choosing differently. Cultural trauma is powerful, but it is not absolute. There should be outliers. There should be exceptions, but there are none. The implications hung in the air like poison gas. Something had happened to the survivors of the Earth assault. Something that went beyond physical wounds or psychological trauma. Something that had fundamentally changed them in ways the galaxy was only beginning to understand. And humanity, with their cold smiles and diplomatic courtesy, had never spoken a word about it to anyone beyond their own species. Council member Thrix had not slept since the emergency session ended 3 cycles ago. Her species required rest only once every 8 standard days, but the information presented by Ambassador Vereth had disturbed her in ways that transcended physical exhaustion. She had lived for 240 years, had witnessed the rise and fall of 3 civilizations, had negotiated peace treaties that saved billions of lives, yet never had she encountered a mystery that filled her with such profound unease. She had requested a private meeting with Ambassador Vereth, and he had agreed without hesitation. Now they sat together in her personal quarters aboard the council station, surrounded by the soft bioluminescent glow of her meditation pools. The Zephyron ambassador's crystalline form reflected the light in patterns that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. "You have uncovered more," Thrix stated. It was not a question. She had learned to read Verith over their many years serving together. His earlier presentation had been carefully measured, revealing only enough to disturb the council without causing panic. But she could see the tension in the way his light patterns flickered, the telltale sign of a burden he was desperate to share. Verith's form pulsed slowly. "I have, and I wish I had not. Councilmember Thrix, what I'm about to tell you must remain between us until I can verify my findings. If word of this reaches the greater galaxy prematurely, it could cause a panic that would make the Krayler swarm look like a minor inconvenience." Thrix felt her mandibles tighten. She had fought in 3 wars and had seen entire worlds reduced to rubble. Yet something in Verith's tone made her feel like a young nymph hearing ghost stories in the dark. "Speak freely, Ambassador. Whatever you have discovered, I am prepared to hear it." "I managed to obtain access to human military archives," Verith began, "not through official channels. I would never have been granted permission through those. But I have contacts among the syndicate, information brokers who trade in secrets. They charged me a fortune, nearly bankrupted my family's holdings, but they delivered something extraordinary. They delivered testimony from a human who served in Earth's defense during the assault. He projected a hologram into the space between them. A human male appeared, middle-aged by their standards, with scars covering the visible portions of his face and neck. His eyes held something Thrix recognized from her own combat experience, a certain emptiness that came from witnessing horrors no living being should ever see. "This is Commander Marcus Webb," Verith explained. "He commanded one of Earth's orbital defense platforms during the assault. His station was destroyed on the 2nd day of fighting. He survived by using an escape pod to reach the surface. He fought on the ground for the remainder of the battle. This recording was made 2 years after the assault ended, during what humans call a debriefing session with their military intelligence division." Verith activated the recording. The human's voice filled the room, speaking in the standardized galactic common language, though his accent carried the harsh tones of someone who had learned it as a second language later in life. "They want me to talk about what it was like," Commander Webb said, his gaze fixed on something beyond the camera. "They want me to describe the fighting, the tactics we used, the weapons we deployed. They want technical data, strategic analysis, lessons learned for future encounters. But that is not the real story. That is not what they need to understand." The human paused, his jaw working as if he were chewing on words too difficult to swallow. "The real story began on the 4th day, the day after the Krayler retreated. We were still in combat mode, still manning weapons that had no ammunition, still scanning skies that were finally empty, and then the communications came through. Not from our military command, not from our government, from orbit, from the Galactic Council observation fleet that had been watching the whole time." Thrix felt her body go rigid. She had been there. She had been on one of those observation ships, had watched Earth burn from the safety of stealth-shielded vessels while following the Council's ancient laws. The guilt of that memory had never left her. Commander Webb's expression shifted, something dark and terrible crossing his features. "They sent messages of congratulations. They praised our resilience. They offered aid and supplies. They welcomed us into full Council membership, no longer just associates but complete partners in the galactic community. And they explained very carefully that they had not been permitted to help us because of the prime directive of non-interference, ancient laws, sacred traditions. They hoped we understood." The human laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "We understood. We understood perfectly. We understood that we had been left to die because helping us would have been inconvenient for their precious traditions. We understood that 2 billion of our people had been slaughtered, while ships capable of stopping the swarm in minutes sat and watched. We understood that in the hierarchy of galactic priorities our lives meant nothing." Verith paused the recording. "What comes next is the important part. I need you to truly listen, Councilmember Thrix. I need you to understand what this human is about to describe." The recording resumed. Commander Webb leaned forward, his scarred hands clasped together on the table before him. "Something changed in those of us who survived," he said quietly. "Not immediately, not in some dramatic moment. It happened gradually over the weeks and months that followed. We buried our dead. We cleared the rubble. We accepted the Council's aid packages and said the appropriate words of gratitude. But inside, something fundamental had shifted." The human stood, pacing within the frame of the recording. You have to understand what it means to fight for survival knowing that help is available but withheld. You have to understand what it does to your psyche to realize that you are truly alone, that the universe does not care if you live or die, that all the grand civilizations and ancient traditions and noble principles will not save you when you need them most. It strips away illusions. It burns away the comfortable lies we tell ourselves about community and cooperation and shared destiny. Webb stopped pacing, turned to face the camera directly. We who survived the assault made a choice, not consciously, not through any formal decision or vote, but we made it nonetheless, every single one of us, as if we were connected by something deeper than words or laws. We chose not to bring children into this galaxy. We chose not to create new life that would have to exist in a universe where 2 billion people could be left to burn while others watched. Thrix's breathing had become shallow. She wanted to stop the recording, to unsee what she was seeing, but she forced herself to continue watching. It was not an act of despair, Webb continued. It was not suicide by declining birth rates. It was a statement, a message that we knew the Council would eventually discover. We wanted you to know that your choice had consequences, that your laws had cost, that the 2 billion of us who survived would be the last generation born on Earth before the assault. We would live our lives, contribute to humanity's expansion, serve in whatever capacity was needed, but we would leave no legacy, no descendants, no continuation of the bloodline of those who were abandoned. The human's eyes seemed to look directly at Thrix, across time and space and the barrier of the recording. We are ghosts. All 2 billion of us. We walk among humanity, but we are not truly part of humanity's future. We are a reminder of what was lost, of what was taken from us. And when the last of us dies, when the last survivor finally passes from this universe, we will take with us the memory of those 3 days when we learned the true nature of the galactic community. The recording ended. Silence filled Thrix's quarters, broken only by the soft bubbling of her meditation pools. Vereth's crystalline form had dimmed to almost nothing. There is more, he said softly. I have found similar testimonies from 47 other survivors. All say the same thing in their own words. They made a collective choice not through any formal agreement, but through some shared understanding that emerged from their trauma. They chose to be the end of their line. Thrix could barely form words. The Council must be told. The full Council. This changes everything we thought we understood about humanity. Does it? Vereth asked. Or does it merely confirm what we already suspected? That humanity is capable of acts of collective will that defy our understanding, that they operate on levels of coordination that make our own civilizations look fragmented and chaotic? He moved closer, his light patterns pulsing with an urgency Thrix had never seen from him before. Council member Thrix, this is not the disturbing part. This is merely the context. The disturbing part is what happened next, what is still happening. Because the survivors did not simply choose not to have children. They chose something far more systematic, far more calculated, far more terrifying than mere childlessness. Thrix felt dread settle into her thorax like ice. What did they choose? Vereth displayed another hologram, this one showing a complex network of data streams and population movements across human space. After the assault, the survivors dispersed throughout human territory. They took positions in military command, in government, in research institutions, in corporate leadership. They spread themselves across 400 systems like seeds scattered on barren ground. The research facility on Kepler Station hummed with activity, as Dr. Yanara of the Melor species examined the latest data streams from human space. She had been recruited by Ambassador Vereth 6 weeks ago, brought into a secret investigation that was growing more complex with each passing day. As a xenosociologist specializing in species-level behavioral patterns, she was uniquely qualified to analyze what Vereth had discovered. She was also beginning to wish she had declined the assignment. The conference room where she now sat contained only 3 individuals beyond herself. Ambassador Vereth, whose crystalline form seemed perpetually dimmed these days. Council member Thrix, who had aged visibly since learning the truth about Earth's survivors. And Commander Zolath, a grizzled military officer from the Orion Collective who had seen more combat than the other 3 combined. Yanara activated her presentation, her tentacles moving across the holographic controls with practiced efficiency. I have completed my analysis of the human survivors' dispersal patterns over the past 60 years. What Ambassador Verith suspected is correct. The survivors did not randomly scatter across human space. They positioned themselves with surgical precision. The hologram displayed a three-dimensional map of human territory, with 2 billion glowing points representing the survivors of the Earth assault. As Yanara manipulated the timeline, the points spread outward from Earth like blood flowing through veins, reaching every corner of human civilization. Notice the distribution, Yanara continued. 38% took positions in military command structures, not as frontline soldiers but as strategists, logistics coordinators and intelligence officers. Another 27% entered government at various levels, from local planetary councils to seats in humanity's Central Assembly. 15% joined research institutions focusing on weapons development, defensive technologies, and xenobiology. The remainder scattered across education, media, corporate leadership, and civil infrastructure. Commander Zolath leaned forward, his reptilian eyes narrowing. That is not a natural distribution. That is a coordinated deployment. Precisely, Yanara agreed. But here is what makes it truly disturbing. I cross-referenced the survivors' career trajectories with major shifts in human policy and behavior over the past 60 years. The correlation is absolute. Every significant change in how humanity interacts with the galactic community can be traced back to initiatives, proposals, or legislation influenced by survivors of the Earth assault. She changed the display to show a timeline marked with key events. Year 3 after the assault, humanity begins a massive military expansion. The proposal comes from Admiral Sarah Chen, a survivor. Year 7, humanity establishes the Outer Colonies Defense Initiative, a program to ensure every human settlement has autonomous defensive capabilities. Authored by Senator Marcus Webb, a survivor. Year 12, humanity withdraws from 3 joint scientific ventures with council species, citing concerns about technological security. The recommendation comes from a report written by Dr. James Morrison, a survivor. The list went on and on. Trade agreements renegotiated to favor human independence. Military doctrines revised to assume no external aid would be available in crisis situations. Educational curricula modified to emphasize self-reliance and skepticism of galactic institutions. Immigration policies adjusted to track and document all non-human visitors with unprecedented thoroughness. They are systematically isolating humanity, Thrix whispered. Turning an entire species inward, away from the galactic community. Not entirely, Yanara corrected. That is what makes this so sophisticated. Humanity maintains trade relations, diplomatic ties, and cultural exchanges. They participate in council activities and contribute to joint initiatives. On the surface, they appear to be engaged members of the galactic community. But underneath, they are building a civilization that assumes it will always be alone when it matters most. Verith's form pulsed with agitation. They are preparing for another assault. Everything they have done, every policy they have implemented, every strategic decision they have made assumes that the Krayler or something like them will return, and that the Council will once again watch while humanity burns. Commander Zolath made a sound that might have been laughter, if it contained any humor. Can you blame them? We did exactly what they expect us to do. We watched their world burn because our laws were more important than their lives. Why should they trust us to act differently in the future? The question hung in the air like an accusation. None of them had a good answer. Yanara manipulated the display again, pulling up a series of documents that had been leaked from human military archives. There is more. I have obtained copies of strategic planning documents from Humanity's Defense Coordination Bureau. These documents outline scenarios for various types of galactic crises, Krayler incursions, civil wars between council species, economic collapse, resource conflicts. Every scenario assumes zero support from the Galactic Council. She highlighted a particular section of one document. This one is titled, Response Protocol Omega. It describes humanity's planned response if another species is attacked by an overwhelming force like the Krayler swarm. Thrix leaned closer, her mandibles clicking as she read. They plan to intervene, even without council authorization, even in violation of the Prime Directive. Yes, Yanara confirmed. If another species faces extinction while the council watches, humanity intends to violate every law, every treaty, every sacred tradition to provide aid. They are explicitly preparing to become what the Council refused to be for them. The implications were staggering. Humanity was not simply preparing to defend itself. It was preparing to defend others, to act as a counterweight to the Council's paralysis, to ensure that what happened to Earth never happened to anyone else. It was a level of moral commitment that made the ancient civilizations of the galaxy look cold and calculating by comparison. Commander Zolath stood, his massive form casting shadows across the conference table. We need to understand what the survivors are ultimately planning. Are they content to simply reshape humanity's strategic posture, or is there an endgame we have not yet identified? Yanara hesitated, her tentacles coiling with anxiety. I have a theory, but it is based on incomplete data and psychological projections that may be completely wrong. Speak freely, Varath encouraged. We are beyond the point of comfortable certainties. Yanara took a deep breath, her species equivalent of gathering courage. The survivors are dying, not quickly but inevitably. Humans live approximately 100 standard years. 60 have already passed since the assault. In another 40 years, the last survivor will be gone, and I believe that is when humanity's true plan will be revealed. She pulled up medical records showing the average age of survivors. The curve was clear. Within 2 generations, they would all be gone. The survivors are not just reshaping humanity's present, Yanara continued. They are programming its future. Every policy they have implemented, every institution they have built, every lesson they have taught to the post-assault generations is designed to persist after they are gone. They are creating a human civilization that will remember the Earth assault not as a historical tragedy, but as a defining moment that shapes every decision for centuries to come. Thrix's voice was barely audible. They are turning their trauma into humanity's permanent worldview. Yes, Yanara confirmed. And they are doing it with such subtlety that most humans do not even realize it is happening. The post-assault generations believe they are simply being pragmatic, simply learning from history. They do not understand that their entire civilization is being molded by 2 billion people who chose to be the last of their line, so their message would never be forgotten. Varath's form brightened suddenly, a sign of revelation among his people. The question is not what the survivors are planning. The question is what humanity will become after the survivors are gone. What kind of civilization will emerge from a species that has been taught to trust no one, to rely on nothing beyond its own strength, to expect abandonment in its darkest hour? Commander Zolath moved to the viewing port, staring out at the stars beyond the station. A dangerous one. A civilization that believes it is alone in a hostile universe does not play by the rules of the galactic community. It makes its own rules. It takes what it needs. It trusts only force, only deterrence, only the certainty that it can survive anything the galaxy throws at it. He turned back to face the others, his expression grim. The survivors are not preparing humanity to be part of the galactic community. They are preparing humanity to transcend it, to become something that exists alongside the Council but is not bound by it. They are creating a civilization that will be a law unto itself. Yanara felt her hearts beating rapidly, a sign of distress among her people. There is one more thing. I accessed human cultural databases, examined their art and literature from the past 60 years. There's a recurring theme in post-assault human fiction, stories about species who stand alone against impossible odds, narratives celebrating independence and self-determination, cautionary tales about the dangers of trusting others for survival. Ambassador Varath had called an emergency meeting of his secret investigative committee, but this time there was a new member present. Captain Elena Vasquez sat across from the assembled alien delegates, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp with intelligence that made even Commander Zolath uncomfortable. She was human, a military officer who had served in the aftermath of the Earth assault, though she had been off-world during the attack itself. She was also one of the few humans willing to speak openly about what her species had become. I appreciate you agreeing to meet with us, Captain Vasquez, Varath began, his crystalline form pulsing with nervous energy. We have been investigating certain patterns in human behavior, and we believe you can provide insight we desperately need. Elena smiled, but it was the kind of smile that reminded everyone present why humans were considered apex predators on their homeworld. You want to know about the survivors, about what they are planning, about why an entire generation of humans chose to leave no children behind. The directness of her statement caught them off guard. Thrix recovered first. You know what we have been researching? Of course, Elena replied. Did you think you could dig through human archives and interview information brokers without someone noticing? We have been watching your investigation since it began, Ambassador Vereth. We know about your leaked documents, your psychological analyses, your theories about humanity's future. We let you continue because we wanted you to understand. The room fell silent. The realization that they had been allowed to discover everything, that their entire investigation had been observed and permitted, sent chills through every non-human present. Elena leaned back in her chair, seemingly at ease despite being surrounded by beings who could have her arrested for espionage. Let me tell you a story about my aunt. Her name was Maria Vasquez, and she was on Earth during the assault. She worked at a hospital in Buenos Aires, one of the cities that was hit hardest by the Kraler ground forces. For 3 days, she performed surgery on wounded soldiers and civilians, while the building shook from explosions. She saved hundreds of lives, working without sleep, without rest, until the Kraler were driven back. She paused, her expression becoming distant. When I returned to Earth after the assault ended, I found her in that same hospital. Still working, still saving lives. But something had changed. She smiled when she saw me, hugged me, asked about my service in the defense fleet, all the appropriate emotional responses. But her eyes were empty, like she was looking at me from very far away. Elena's fingers drummed on the table, a nervous habit that seemed out of place given her otherwise composed demeanor. I asked her about starting a family. She was only 40 years old, had always talked about wanting children. She looked at me like I had asked her to walk into a furnace. She said something I will never forget. She said she would not bring a child into a galaxy that had taught her the true value of human life, which is to say no value at all. Yanara's tentacles coiled with distress. Captain Vasquez, please understand that the Council's laws were not meant to be cruel. They were designed to prevent galactic wars to ensure that advanced species did not impose their will on younger civilizations. I know, Elena said, her voice flat. The survivors know too. They understand the reasoning. They even acknowledge that there is a certain logic to it. But understanding something intellectually is very different from living through its consequences. My aunt understood why the Council watched Earth burn. She just could not forgive it. None of the survivors could. Commander Zolath shifted in his seat. We have determined that the survivors have systematically reshaped human civilization over the past 60 years. Are you saying this was intentional? A coordinated effort? Elena laughed, a sharp sound without joy. Coordinated? Not in the way you think. There was no conspiracy, no secret meetings, no master plan discussed in hidden chambers. It happened organically, naturally, like water finding the lowest point. The survivors scattered across human space, and everywhere they went, they made decisions based on one fundamental truth they had learned: that humanity could trust only itself. She stood, walking to the viewing port to gaze out at the stars. You want to know the really terrifying part? The survivors did not set out to change humanity. They were not trying to build some grand new civilization. They were just trying to ensure that what happened to them never happened again. Every policy they proposed, every institution they built, every lesson they taught was about survival, about making sure that if the Kraler or something worse came back, humanity would be ready. And that readiness had to be absolute, because they knew deep in their souls that no one would come to help. Vereth's form flickered, but the changes they made went beyond defensive preparations. They altered trade policies, cultural norms, educational systems. They reshaped every aspect of human civilization. Because survival is not just about having bigger guns, Elena replied. It is about having the industrial capacity to build those guns, the economic independence to sustain a war effort, the cultural unity to endure sacrifices, the educational foundation to produce the scientists and engineers and strategists needed to fight. The survivors understood that defense is holistic. You cannot just build a military and expect to survive. You have to build an entire civilization around the principle of self-reliance. She turned back to face them, and that is what they did. Quietly, patiently, systematically, they turned humanity into a civilization that could stand alone against anything, not because they wanted to be isolated from the galaxy, but because they had learned that isolation was the default state, that cooperation and mutual aid were luxuries that vanished the moment things became difficult. Thrix's mandibles clicked anxiously. Captain Vasquez, our analysis suggests that when the last survivor dies, humanity will be fundamentally changed, that the lessons the survivors taught will persist for generations, Perhaps forever. Do you believe this is accurate? Elena's smile returned, and this time there was something deeply unsettling about it. Councilmember Thrix, the survivors will never truly die. Oh, their bodies will fail, their hearts will stop beating, their consciousness will fade. But what they created will live forever. They have written themselves into the DNA of human civilization. Every human child born today learns about the Earth assault in school. Every military officer studies the tactics used during those 3 days. Every politician invokes the memory of those who were left to burn. The survivors have become mythology, and mythology never dies. She returned to her seat, her expression growing more serious. But there is something you need to understand. Something your investigation may have missed. The survivors did not just reshape human civilization out of fear or bitterness. They did it out of love. The statement seemed so incongruous with everything they had discussed that Yanara could not help but question it. Love? How can systematically isolating an entire species be an act of love? Elena's eyes softened slightly. Because they knew that another assault would come eventually. Maybe not the Krayler. Maybe not in 50 years or 100, but somewhere, sometime, humanity would face another existential threat. And when that day came, they wanted humanity to survive. They wanted the species to continue, even if their own bloodlines ended. So they did the only thing they could. They made humanity strong enough to stand alone. They gave humanity the tools, the mindset, the infrastructure to survive anything. That is love. Terrible, painful, costly love, but love nonetheless. She paused, letting her words sink in. My aunt died 5 years ago. In her final days, I asked her if she regretted not having children. She told me no. She said her children were the policies she helped write, the defenses she helped design, the future she helped secure. She said every human born after the assault was her descendant, shaped by the lessons she and the other survivors had taught. She died believing she had done what was necessary to protect them all. Commander Zolath spoke, his voice heavy with something that might have been respect. So the survivors saw themselves as guardians. Protectors who sacrificed their own genetic legacy to ensure humanity's survival. Exactly, Elena confirmed. And it worked. Look at humanity today. We have the most advanced military in the galaxy, relative to our age as a spacefaring species. Our economy is largely self-sufficient. Our research institutions are developing technologies that make some council species nervous. Our colonies are self-sustaining and capable of independent defense. In 60 years, the survivors transformed humanity from a species that nearly died to a species that could challenge any member of the council. And they did it all while maintaining diplomatic relations and following galactic law. That is the genius of what they accomplished. Verath's form pulsed with realization. But this creates a problem. A humanity that can challenge council members, that trusts no one, that prepares for war even during peace, that believes it must stand alone. What happens when such a species decides the Galactic Council is no longer useful? What happens when they conclude that the same laws that left Earth to burn might one day threaten their interests again? Elena met his gaze steadily. That is the question you should be asking. Not what the survivors did or why they did it, but what comes next. Because you are right. Humanity is becoming something new. Something the galaxy has never seen before. A species that combines the technological sophistication of ancient civilizations with the survival instinct of prey animals who became predators. A species that learned the hardest lesson the universe can teach while it was still young enough to adapt. She stood, preparing to leave. The survivors made a choice 60 years ago. They chose to be ghosts, to be warnings, to be lessons written in flesh and blood. They chose to have no descendants so that all of humanity could become their descendants. And now you have to make a choice. Do you try to reverse what they created? Do you attempt to integrate humanity more fully into the Council? To soften the lessons the survivors taught? Or do you accept that humanity has fundamentally changed, and the galaxy must adapt to what we have become? Thrix felt a wave of despair wash over her. Is there no middle path? No way to heal the damage that was done? Elena's expression became almost pitying. Councilmember Thrix, the damage was done 60 years ago when the Council chose laws over lives. What the survivors did was not damage. It was treatment. They cauterized a wound that would have festered and destroyed humanity from within. They turned grief and betrayal into purpose and strength. You cannot heal that because it is not a wound anymore. It is scar tissue. And scar tissue is stronger than regular flesh. She moved toward the door, then paused. I will tell you one final thing. A secret that even your investigation did not uncover. The survivors left messages. Digital archives, sealed documents, personal journals, all set to be released when the last survivor dies. Messages explaining their choices, their reasoning, their hopes and fears. Messages addressed not to humanity but to the Galactic Council. And when those messages become public, when every species in the galaxy reads the testimonies of 2 billion humans who chose extinction over propagation in a universe that watched them burn, you will have to answer for your inaction. Not legally, not politically, but morally. The survivors will have their final say, and the galaxy will finally understand the true cost of the Prime Directive. She left the room, her footsteps echoing in the silence she left behind. Commander Zolath was the first to speak. We have made a grave error. We thought we were investigating human behavior, but we were actually being judged. The humans have been watching us investigate their trauma, watching us struggle to understand what we created through our inaction, and they have been measuring us, determining whether we learned anything from what happened. Yanara's tentacles trembled. What do we do? How do we respond when those messages are released? Vareth's form had dimmed to almost nothing. We tell the truth. We acknowledge our failure. We admit that our laws cost 2 billion humans their future, and 2 billion more their willingness to create futures of their own. We face the judgment of the galaxy and accept whatever consequences come. Thrick shook her head slowly. It will not be enough. Nothing we say or do will be enough. The survivors made sure of that. They turned their sacrifice into a permanent indictment of the Council's principles. Every human that lives from this day forward will be a reminder that we chose tradition over compassion, law over life. We cannot undo that. We can only live with it. The four of them sat in the conference room long after Captain Vasquez had departed, each lost in their own thoughts about the future they had helped create through their past inaction. Somewhere in human space, the last survivors of the Earth assault continued their lives, counting down the days until they would join their fallen. And when they were gone, their message would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. A warning about the cost of standing aside while others suffer. A testament to the strength that can emerge from the deepest wounds. 20 years had passed since Ambassador Vareth first presented his findings to the Emergency Council session. 20 years of watching humanity grow stronger, more independent, more formidable with each passing cycle. The investigation he had begun was now declassified, its findings public knowledge across the galaxy. The reaction had been exactly what he feared it would be. Some species expressed sympathy for humanity's trauma. Others voiced concerns about humanity's growing military capabilities. A few suggested that perhaps the Prime Directive needed to be reformed, that ancient laws written in different times might not serve the galaxy's current needs. But mostly, the galaxy simply watched humanity with increasing unease, unable to predict what this strange species would do next. Vareth himself had retired from active diplomatic service, but he maintained his interest in human affairs. He had become something of an expert on human psychology, writing papers and giving lectures about the transformation that had occurred after the Earth assault. His work was respected but unsettling, forcing other species to confront uncomfortable truths about their own assumptions and values. Today, he sat in his private study on his homeworld, reviewing the latest reports from human space. What he read filled him with a mixture of awe and dread. Humanity had just completed construction of the Bastion network, a series of heavily armed space stations positioned at strategic points throughout their territory. Each station was capable of supporting a fleet of warships and housing millions of civilians in the event of an evacuation. The network was designed to ensure that no human world would ever stand alone against an invasion. That help would always be available within hours rather than days. It was an engineering marvel that had cost trillions of credits and required the coordination of hundreds of worlds. And it was completely autonomous from any Galactic Council support. But that was not the most interesting development. Humanity had also announced something called the Sentinel Initiative, a program to provide defensive technology and military training to younger spacefaring species that did not yet have full Council membership, that existed in the same vulnerable position humanity had occupied 60 years ago. The initiative was voluntary, required no payment, and came with no strings attached. Humanity was offering to do for others what the Council had refused to do for them. The implications were staggering. If successful, the Sentinel Initiative would create a network of species loyal to humanity rather than the Council. It would establish humanity as a rival power center within the galaxy, an alternative to the Council's authority. And it was all perfectly legal, violating no treaties or agreements. Vareth's communicator chimed. A message from Council Member Thrix, now serving as Speaker of the Council. The message was brief but urgent. She requested his immediate presence at a special session. The subject was simply listed as Human Matters. He arrived at the Council chamber 3 days later, his form still vibrant despite his advanced age. The chamber was packed. Representatives from every member species present along with observers from dozens of associate species. The tension in the room was palpable. Thrix called the session to order, her voice carrying the weight of her position. Honored delegates, we are gathered today to discuss a development that threatens the fundamental structure of galactic governance. As you all know, humanity has announced the Sentinel Initiative, a program to provide defensive support to younger species. On its surface, this appears to be a humanitarian effort. In practice, it represents a direct challenge to Council authority and the principles that have guided our civilization for millennia. A delegate from the Orion Collective stood, his scales rippling with agitation. Speaker Thrix, humanity is offering to defend species that we, in our wisdom, have deemed not ready for full military protection. They are undermining the very laws that maintain galactic stability. This cannot be tolerated. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber, but there were also voices of dissent. Younger species who had watched the Earth assault from the sidelines and wondered if they would receive the same treatment humanity had. A representative from the Kalorn Confederacy, a species that had achieved spaceflight only 40 years ago, spoke up. With respect, Council Member, why should we trust the Council's wisdom when it left humanity to burn? The humans have offered us something you never have, the certainty that someone will stand with us if we face extinction. Can you blame us for accepting? The chamber erupted in debate. Some delegates argued for sanctions against humanity, for declaring the Sentinel Initiative a violation of galactic law. Others suggested negotiation, finding a way to incorporate human defensive assistance into the Council framework. Still others advocated for reforming the Prime Directive itself, acknowledging that perhaps the ancient laws needed updating. Through it all, Vareth noticed that the human delegation sat in quiet observation. Ambassador Chen, who had replaced the previous human representative 5 years ago, simply watched the proceedings with an expression that was impossible to read. She made no speeches, offered no justifications, submitted no formal proposals. She just waited. The debate continued for hours, spiraling in circles as delegates argued over principles and precedents. Finally, Thrix called for order, her voice cutting through the chaos. This debate is pointless, she declared. We can argue about laws and traditions all we want, but the fundamental question remains unanswered. Why should younger species trust us when we have proven ourselves unwilling to help them in their darkest hour? The humans have exposed the central hypocrisy of our civilization. We claim to be a community, but we are only a community when it is convenient. When it is difficult, when it requires sacrifice, we hide behind our laws and watch others suffer. The chamber fell silent. Thrix had voiced what many had been thinking, but few had dared to say. She continued, her voice heavy with emotion. 60 years ago, we watched Earth burn. We told ourselves it was necessary, that our laws required it, that we were protecting the greater good. But we were lying to ourselves. We were protecting our comfort, our traditions, our unwillingness to risk ourselves for others, and humanity learned that lesson well. They learned that the galaxy does not care about justice or compassion or shared humanity. It only cares about power and self-interest. Ambassador Chen rose from her seat, drawing every eye in the chamber. She walked to the speaker's platform with measured steps, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. Speaker Thrix is correct, Chen said, her voice calm and clear. The galaxy taught us that we are alone, that no one will help us when we truly need it. That pretty words about community and cooperation are just that. Words. So we adapted. We became strong enough to stand alone. We built a civilization that needs nothing from anyone, that can survive anything the universe throws at us. She paused, letting her words sink in. But here is what you do not understand about humanity. We did not just learn to stand alone. We learned why standing alone is wrong. We learned that watching others suffer when you have the power to help is a moral failure, regardless of what your laws say. We learned that true strength is not the ability to stand alone, but the choice to stand with others even when it is hard, even when it costs you. even when your laws tell you not to." The chamber was utterly silent now. Chen's words carried a weight that made even the oldest and most powerful delegates uncomfortable. "The Sentinel Initiative is not a challenge to Council authority," Chen continued. "It is a response to Council failure. You created a system where young species are left vulnerable, where those who have not yet proven themselves worthy are abandoned to their fate. We are simply filling the void you created. If you want us to stop, if you want to maintain your authority and your traditions, then change your laws. Reform the Prime Directive. Provide real protection to those who need it. Prove that the Galactic Council is more than just a social club for ancient civilizations that pat themselves on the back while the vulnerable burn." She turned to face Vareth directly.
"Ambassador Vareth, you investigated what the survivors did to humanity.
You documented how they reshaped our civilization, how they taught us to trust no one but ourselves. But did you understand why they did it? Not just to protect humanity, but to create a civilization that would never do to others what the Council did to us. The survivors wanted humanity to be strong, yes, but they also wanted us to be better than those who abandoned us." Chen returned to her seat, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Vareth felt something shift inside him, a realization that reshaped everything he thought he understood about humanity. The survivors had not created a civilization of isolated paranoids. They had created a civilization that understood both the necessity of strength and the moral imperative of compassion. They had taught humanity to be strong enough to help others, to never need permission or approval to do what was right. They had taken their own abandonment and transformed it into a determination that no one else would ever feel that same despair. The message arrived simultaneously to every communication network in the galaxy. It was a simple data packet, unremarkable in its technical specifications, but its content would reshape interstellar civilization forever. The last survivor of the Earth assault had died 3 days ago, and with her death the archives had been unsealed. Vareth sat in his study, the holographic display showing the face of Dr. Sarah Chen, the same woman who had appeared in Commander Webb's testimony so many years ago. She had been 98 years old when this recording was made. Her face lined with age, but her eyes still carrying that same terrible clarity he remembered from the earlier testimonies. "My name is Dr. Sarah Chen," the recording began. "I am the final survivor of the Earth assault. By the time you see this, I will be dead, and the promise we made to ourselves 100 years ago will be complete. We, the 2 billion who survived those 3 days of hell, will have left no descendants. Our bloodlines end with us. This was our choice, our statement, our message to the galaxy. And now in death we will explain why." The recording changed, showing archived footage from the Earth assault. Vareth had seen this footage before, but watching it again with the knowledge of what came after made it somehow more terrible. Cities burning, ships exploding, civilians fleeing through streets while Krayler drones hunted them, and above it all, silent and still, the observation vessels of the Galactic Council. "We do not ask for your pity," Dr. Chen's voice continued over the images. "We do not want your guilt, though you should feel it. What we want is for you to understand what you did, not just to us but to yourselves. You watched us burn because your laws were more important than our lives. You chose tradition over compassion, principle over people, and in doing so, you revealed the true nature of your civilization." The footage shifted to show the aftermath, the ruined continents, the mass graves, the survivors wandering through ash-covered streets looking for anyone they had known. Vareth felt his form dim with the weight of those images. "We survivors made a choice in those first days after the assault ended," Dr. Chen continued. "We chose not to have children, not because we were broken, though we were, not because we were incapable, though many of us felt that way. We chose it because we wanted you to know, truly know, what it meant to abandon 2 billion people to their deaths. We wanted our absence to be permanent, to be measurable, to be something you could quantify and track. We wanted you to count our missing descendants and understand that each one represented a choice, a deliberate decision not to propagate in a galaxy that had proven itself morally bankrupt." The recording showed Dr. Chen herself now, sitting in what appeared to be a garden. Earth had been restored over the decades, its scars healed through human effort and council assistance. But the woman in the recording looked as scarred as the planet had once been. "But we did more than just refuse to have children," she said. "We reshaped human civilization. We taught humanity that the galaxy would never protect them, that they must always be ready to stand alone. We built institutions and policies and cultural values all designed around one fundamental truth. That when it matters most, you are alone. She paused, her aged hands trembling slightly, and we were right to do so. In the 100 years since the assault, has the Council changed its laws? Has the Prime Directive been reformed? Have any of the ancient civilizations admitted that maybe, just maybe, watching others die to preserve your traditions is wrong? No, you have done nothing. You have learned nothing. You have changed nothing. The recording shifted again, this time showing images of the Sentinel Initiative. Human ships arriving at vulnerable worlds, offering protection and support. Training programs teaching younger species how to defend themselves. Defensive installations being built at humanity's expense to protect those who could not protect themselves. So we ensured that humanity would do what you refused to do, Dr. Chen said. We created a civilization strong enough to help others, brave enough to violate your precious laws if necessary, and moral enough to care when others suffer. We took our pain and transformed it into purpose. We took our abandonment and turned it into a determination that no one else would ever feel what we felt. The recording returned to Dr. Chen in her garden. Tears ran down her weathered face, but her voice remained steady. I want you to know that this was not an easy choice. Every survivor lived with the knowledge that their bloodline would end with them. We attended the births of our siblings' children, our friends' children, the children of those who were off-world during the assault. We loved them, raised them, taught them. They became our children in every way except biologically. But we never forgot that our own genetic legacy ended with us. That sacrifice was our gift to humanity, our final service to the species we loved. She wiped her tears, straightening in her seat. But now I want to address something else. Something that our investigations over the past century have revealed. The Council knew the Krayler were coming. Your intelligence services detected their fleet weeks before it arrived at Earth. You had time to warn us, to help us evacuate, to prepare. But you did not. Because to do so would have violated the Prime Directive. It would have been interference in the affairs of an associate species. Vareth felt his form flicker with shock. He had not known this. He suspected few members of the Council had known. So you let us die, Dr. Chen continued, her voice now hard as steel. Not through negligence or accident, but through deliberate choice. You knew we would be attacked, knew we were not ready to face such a threat, and you chose to say nothing. 2 billion people died because you valued your laws more than their lives. And you have never acknowledged this. You have never apologized. You have never even admitted that you knew. The recording showed documents now. Intelligence reports from various Council species, all predating the Earth assault by weeks or months, all documenting Krayler fleet movements toward human space, all marked as requiring no action due to the Prime Directive. These documents will now become public, Dr. Chen said. Every species in the galaxy will know that the Council watched us die not out of legal obligation, but out of moral cowardice. You could have warned us without violating your precious laws. You could have given us time to prepare, to evacuate civilians, to call back our military forces from distant postings. But you did not. Because even that small act of compassion was too much to ask. She stood walking through her garden with the careful steps of someone whose body was failing. I am dying. I have weeks left, perhaps days. I am the last survivor, the final ghost of the Earth assault. When I am gone, our statement will be complete. 2 billion bloodlines, ended by choice, as a permanent reminder of what you are capable of when you value law over life. She stopped beside a monument, a simple stone marker with names carved into its surface. Millions of names, the dead of the Earth assault. But I want you to know something. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the pain and the loneliness of knowing my line ends with me, I do not regret what we did. We survivors took our trauma and turned it into transformation. We ensured that humanity would never be as naive as we were, as trusting as we were, as vulnerable as we were, and more importantly, we ensured that humanity would never be as callous as you are. The recording began to fade, Dr. Chen's voice becoming softer. The Sentinel Initiative is just the beginning. Humanity will continue to grow, to strengthen, to expand, and everywhere we go, we will offer protection to those you refuse to protect. We will stand with those you choose to abandon. We will be the civilization you could have been, but chose not to be. That is our legacy. That is what we survivors created with our sacrifice. And that is why, when historians look back on this era, they will remember us not as victims, but as the generation that taught humanity to be better than those who came before. The recording ended. Verath sat in silence, his form dimmed to almost nothing. Around the galaxy, billions of beings watched the same recording, read the same documents, confronted the same terrible truth. The Galactic Council had not just failed to help Earth. They had knowingly allowed the attack to happen. The political fallout was immediate and catastrophic. 17 species withdrew from the Council within the first week. Others threatened to follow unless the Prime Directive was immediately reformed. Protests erupted on worlds across the galaxy. Younger species looked to humanity with newfound respect and loyalty. Ancient civilizations found themselves on the defensive, struggling to justify laws that had seemed so wise and necessary just days before. But for Verath, the political implications were secondary to a deeper realization. The survivors had won, not through violence or conquest, not through economic pressure or military might. They had won through the power of moral clarity, through the simple act of refusing to participate in a system that valued rules over lives. They had turned their extinction into a statement so powerful that it shook the foundations of galactic civilization. 3 months after the recording was released, the Galactic Council held an emergency session. The vote was unprecedented in its unanimity. The Prime Directive would be reformed. Protection would be extended to all spacefaring species, regardless of their development level.